This is Michael McCulloch. I'm the grandson of Robert P. McCulloch Sr., who purchased the London Bridge in 1968 from the city of London and moved it piece by piece to Lake Havasu City, Arizona.
And my name is Jan Cassis. I am working in the visitor center in Lake Havasu City. I tell people about the London Bridge and about Route 66, and you are listening to the Route 66 podcast.
Route 66, Route 66, right along with the Route 66 podcast. For talks with people living and working along the Mother Road. The main street of America, from Chicago to LA, bore a heavy, heavy load. Route 66, Route 66. Sometimes historical paths aren't discovered until they're lost. Right along with the Route 66 podcast.
Hello and welcome aboard the Route 66 podcast, where talks with people living and working along the Mother Road. I'm your host, Anthony Arno, and I'd like to thank you for joining us here today on our journey. A very special thanks to my Patreon business supporters, including the Midpoint Cafe, Gilligan's Route 66 Tours, and the Jack Rabbit Trading Post. They not only support the podcast, but the Route 66 Scholarship Program as well. Speaking of the Scholarship Program, our next episode will feature the Scholarship Program winners and will include talks with some of the students who submitted work. We will be giving away over $1,000 in scholarship funds to students in grades K through college, and all I can say is, wow! It is just so amazing to see the creativity and the spirit of Route 66 in a whole generation of students who were born years after the highway was decommissioned. Hey, if you're a Patreon supporter, please be sure to check your email for voting instructions. 2022 Route 66 calendars have been sent out to my Patreon supporters, and if you have not yet received one, please let me know. I do have some Patreon supporters who are anonymous or who have not provided me with their address. And even if there's someone else out there that you would like me to send the calendar to instead of you, I'd be happy to take care of that. Thank you again to last month's guest, Ramona Lehman from the Munger Moss Motel. At 83 years old, Ramona holds the record for currently being one of the longest owner-operators of a Route 66 business, running the motel for the past 50 years with her late husband. In fact, that episode just came out last month and already has surpassed previous episodes with well over 2,000 downloads. I am just so glad to have captured the oral history of the Munger Moss from Ramona herself. Thank you. Today, we take a different look at Route 66. We'll be taking a side trip off Route 66 to Lake Havasu to visit the London Bridge. Yes, that London Bridge. The one that was built in London over the Thames and taken down and reconstructed right here in Arizona. The reconstructed London Bridge is the number 2 travel destination in Arizona, second to the Grand Canyon. We'll talk with both the grandson of the man who purchased the bridge 50 years ago, in addition to a representative from the Lake Havasu Visitor Center who provides tours of the bridge. For my Patreon supporters, this episode features an additional 10 minutes Route 66 news. I'm sad to announce the passing of Dave Clark, who was my guest here on the show, episode number 39, where I featured a 3-part series on the beginning, middle, and end of Route 66. Dave provided all the information you would need when starting a road trip in Chicago, from logistics to the original and authentic places to eat and stay on 66. This month, La Fonda is celebrating its 100th anniversary in Santa Fe. I was fortunate enough to stay there with my family this past summer, and I encourage you to stop in at the hotel right there on the square. Even if it's just to walk through the lobby, eat a meal, or maybe even taking a tour they have that features the rich history of one of the most elegant hotels along the road. I have a whole series on Fred Harvey and Harvey Girls, including a talk with the twin sisters who worked at La Fonda as Harvey Girls back in the 1950s. That's on episode number 28. Roman Rich, who has been a past guest here on the show, has announced that he will not only be fixing up the Shamrock Court in Missouri, but also opening up and running the motel once again to travelers sometime in 2023. But for now, he's scheduled a neon lighting ceremony taking place this year on St. Patrick's Day weekend, March 19th. For those of you who don't know, it was Roman Rich who led the effort to restore the Painted Desert Trading Post in Arizona, and what a job they've done. The restored shell of a building located on a dirt road miles from the nearest paved road on what used to be a once busy stretch of Route 66, but today is completely desolate. Rich appears on episode 37 of the show. And lastly, you've seen Cars, you've heard the popular Route 66 song, and maybe even read The Grapes of Wrath when you were in high school. But have you ever seen the TV show Route 66? Whether you watched the show during its 4-year run back in the early 1960s or were born long after it went off the air in 63, Route 66 News reports that all 116 episodes, every episode has been uploaded onto YouTube. Now, ironically, while the TV show Route 66 was one of the first TV shows in its day to be filmed on location throughout the United States, at least 25 different states, there were only 3 or 4 episodes of the show that gave direct reference to the road. And I'll have those shows with mention on the show notes page for today's episode. Listener feedback. And here's a message from Dave from California, who recently did a 53-day Route 66 road trip in an RV with a bunch of other RVers.
Anthony, this is Dave Miller, and I live in Visalia, California, and just recently returned from a 53-day tour of Route 66. We went along with a group of people, adventure caravans, and we were able to take 16 coaches and 31 people along. Like I say, 53 days. And generally on each day, we had a couple things in the morning and a couple things in the afternoon. So I think that's comes out to about 212 different events or things that we were able to see. Started in Chicago. We were able to travel most of the cities and enjoy that entire route, including getting into the town of Oatman and go into the Oatman Hotel and see the walls that are covered with $400,000 in $1 bills.
Wow, 53 days on Route 66 in an RV. That is some trip. Now, I should say that he did send me an email, and what he also mentioned in his message I'd like to share with you. He basically spoke about his past of having traveled the Mother Road a number of times, and for him, it wasn't about finding those old abandoned motels or gas stations. He writes, "It was not the old roadbed that we wanted to see or the abandoned buildings that could be found along the route. What we wanted to see and experience were the many places that make up the history of Route 66, as well as the interesting people who would welcome us along the way." And he did that, from the Skeleton Museum in Oklahoma City to the 15 World War II British Royal Air Force cadets who were buried in Miami, Oklahoma, who died during the training exercises right there on the Mother Road, to, as he mentioned, the wild burrows in Oatman. You want to know more? check out episode 22 for the boroughs and episode 44 for the Miami story. Thanks, Dave. I'll be sending you a 2022 Route 66 wall calendar. And to my listeners, I'd like to send you one too. Just drop me a voice message on the homepage for the podcast at route66podcast.com. There you'll see a tab to record your message. I'll include both a picture and a listing of all the stops that the caravan made, many of which are episodes right here on the show. Thanks again to my Patreon supporters for supporting this podcast and the scholarship program, and they include Mary Beth Busatill from Florida, John B. from Rhode Island, Jim Crabtree from California, Mike Fort, Route 66 author and photographer Shelley Graham, who was my guest on episode number 10, where she spoke about her book, Tales from the Coral Court Motel, Kristen Hackinson from Washington State, Rich Havlick from Minnesota, Mary Nicholson from Pennsylvania, Wendy Rashke from Texas, Brian Sawyer from Indiana, Evan Stern from New York, and international supporters include Charlie Beaton from the United Kingdom and Jim Renson from the Netherlands. The business supporters for this show include the Midpoint Cafe in Adrian, Texas, the Jackrabbit Trading Post in Joseph City, Arizona, and Gilligan's Route 66 Tours. They provide travelers with guided tours of Route 66 in their own Ford convertible Mustang, accommodations at historic Route 66 motels, and breakfast every morning. For more information, please visit gilligansroute66.com. All my Patreon members will receive an extended version of today's show, featuring the full history of the London Bridge, not just the one that was relocated from the United Kingdom to nearby Route 66, but the earlier versions as well, starting with the earliest version during the Roman era that was built over 2,000 years ago. And I invite you to become a Patreon member here at the podcast, where all of my Patreon members at the Will Rogers level and above will receive a 2022 Route 66 wall calendar featuring some of the most desired pictures along the road, including Roy's in Amboy, the Cadillac Ranch, the Blue Whale, the Chain of Rocks Bridge, and the Santa Monica Pier. Please check out my Patreon page to see all the different levels of support that are available not only to support the podcast, but the scholarship program as well, including me showing up in your driveway in an RV and featuring you as a guest on a future episode. And now here's the trivia question for today's show. On the last episode, I featured the Munger Moss Motel and Ramona Lehman. On that show, Ramona revealed that living on Route 66 for the past 50 years, there was one thing she had never done in her life, which really surprised me, being such an advocate for the road. In fact, I even suggested that we start a GoFundMe page for her, and she burst out laughing. I loved her laugh, and I didn't really pick it up at first, but while editing that episode and listening to the audio, it was just so enjoyable to hear her laugh so much after I mentioned that. And it reminded me of past visits with Ramona, standing there in the lobby of the Munger Moss and just shooting the breeze with her for probably a few hours. And, people coming in, checking in or whatever, and just taking a pause. And then when they left, we would just pick up the conversation. So here's the question. What is one thing Ramona has never done along the Mother Road? The answer after today's show. My guest today is a leading expert on the London Bridge. Yes, that London Bridge, which was originally constructed in London, England, and dismantled after 130 years, and reconstructed not too far away from Route 66 in Lake Havasu, Arizona. Please welcome to the podcast, Jan Kasisis. Jan, thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome. I love to do that.
So Jan, how does a Dutch school teacher wind up living alongside the London Bridge in Lake Havasu, Arizona?
It's life. Because in life, anything can happen. And, well, I retired. I had met an American woman. I moved over to the United States. We got married, and we moved to Lake Havasu City because we wanted to be, we didn't like snow. We lived in Columbus, Ohio.
So, Jan, there are a couple of iterations of the London Bridge. Let's go back to about 2,000 years ago during the Anglo-Saxon period. Tell us about the first version of the London Bridge and the famous nursery rhyme.
Well, we have to go a little bit more. We have to go back to the Romans because they built the first bridge. And then London appeared. You know, next to a bridge, always you get a little settlement. Well, after 400 years, the Romans left, and then we ended up in that Anglo-Saxon period. There have been bridges, but in 1200 they built for the first time a nice bridge made of rocks. And you asked me about the song. Well, the song was even before that. When the Vikings were in England, the Vikings fought each other too, the Danes and the Norwegians. The Danes were in charge of the London Bridge. The Norwegian wanted it, and King Olaf came up with his boat, and he destroyed the London Bridge, and the London Bridge was falling down. His bard, his minstrel, made a song about it, and it was London Bridge is falling down, and our king, etc., only good things. That's where the song comes from.
And what's the reference to My Fair Lady, though?
Well, that song echoed in England, and it stayed there. And one day in the Middle Ages, and a king gave some of the king gave the bridge to his wife, and because you could get money from it from toll. But the queen didn't do anything about it. She didn't keep up the bridge, and the bridge was falling down. And the people were singing, London Bridge is falling down. My fair lady, built it up, etc. So that is another part. And of course, you have played the song right. London Bridge is falling down, and maybe you played it as a kid.
And then there was the second bridge, the medieval bridge, at about 1200, which stood for 600 years. So that I found very interesting. Tell us a little bit about the origin of that bridge, and what did that bridge even look like?
There is not such a bridge like that, because the bridge was built on big starlings. It was kind of weird. It looked like a church. It has when you looked at it, there were 19 of these arches, like church windows. On that bridge, they built shops on each side of the road and the shops were about five stories high. And in the middle was that narrow road where you could go by. There were shops under it. So it was just like a mall. The bridge with shops on each side and all kinds of different shops.
So I'm picturing almost like in Italy, in Florence, the Ponte Vecchione Bridge, where people lived there. At the height of that bridge, how many people were living on that bridge?
Hundreds, because there were hundreds of shops, because the bridge was about 1,000 feet.
Wow.
So you can imagine, and they went up, so 5 stories. It was so narrow that carriages hardly could pass each other. It took more than an hour to get across the bridge, so it was a mess most of the time.
And is it true that's the origin of the British driving on the other side of the street?
That's true, because it was such a mess, and people were driving in the Middle Ages, well, wherever they could drive. So there was a lot of fighting, I guess, and cursing and who knows what. Then Lord Mayor said we have to do one thing. Everybody who crosses the bridge has to stay on the left side of the road. Well, and that's the way it started. And ever since, the British are driving on the left side of the road, and even all the colonies of the British. But as you know, the United States was
Not
a colony
us.
too.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think because Americans are stubborn, they want to do what the British told them, so they drove on the right side of the road. And in Europe, they drive on the right side too, because of Napoleon. And Napoleon didn't like the British, so he drove on the other side of the road.
Is that correct? Is that true? I never heard that.
Well, what is true? I've heard it like that too, and I can imagine, because Napoleon did everything to conquer Great Britain. He never did it. It didn't work, but he didn't like him, so he did his own thing.
So I want my listeners to imagine a bridge with buildings 5 stories high and hundreds of people on this bridge living on the bridge. And is it true, Jan, on that particular bridge, the urinals would empty right into the Thames River?
Yeah. And it's great, of course, because a urinal and toilets, they had it in the houses, but there were public toilets too, and you were just sitting next to each other. You know, there was nothing in between. If you have to do what you had to do, you did it there, and it fell down in the river.
So this bridge lasted for about 600 years, and it gets even more weird. What type of heads would they have at the entrance of this bridge?
Well, on this bridge, there was a gate, of course, because they wanted to close it off if the enemy would come. And on the gate, they had stakes, and on the stakes were the heads of the beheaded criminals. Braveheart was the first one, John Wallace. He was beheaded, and if you remember the movie, in the end they say they cut his body in 4 parts and brought it to all the parts of England, of Great Britain, and they put his head on London Bridge. It's in that movie. But that is not the only one. Cromwell was beheaded, and all kinds of people who didn't do what the king wanted them to do were beheaded and put on that. There have been times there were 20 or 30 heads on it. That looks a little dirty, but they put them first in tar, so they stayed a little together, and they stayed there for a while. There was even a guy who was taking care of it. He was the keeper of the heads. British are weird people.
And what was the purpose of that, Jan? Why do you think they would put the head on spikes on the bridge?
Well, when you enter the town, you see these heads on spikes. And then they wanted people to get a little scared and say, oh my goodness, let's behave nicely, because otherwise we end up on, it is to show we are tough, be careful.
Okay, Jan, let's talk about our most famous bridge, the one that is today in Lake Havasu. But tell us, what happened in the 19th century that this bridge, with all those people living on it, eventually was taken down?
Well, you can imagine after about 600 years, it's not that great anymore. Some of the arches fell down, and they tried to build it up, and there's been a fire on it. Thousands of people were killed. The bridge was at its end. So they came up with a plan to make a new bridge. And an architect named John Rennie designed it, 5 arches, or many more arches, many more designs. It was a design of a bridge totally made of metal, steel bridge over, but that did not make it. This was the bridge made of granite from the quarries all over England. And, well, it took quite some time before it was built. They started in the beginning of the 1800s, and in 1831 it was all said and done, and the bridge was dedicated.
So the 1831 London Bridge, which is now in Lake Havasu, did that look like a normal bridge, or did that have like buildings and shops like the previous?
No. This one had only 5 arches. The old one had 19 small arches. This one has 5 arches, 1,000 feet just for traffic, but made of granite. There's a granite wall with balusters and beautiful. There are lights on it. Well, these street lights are made of iron, and they are made of the cannons that Napoleon used in the Battle of Waterloo. They were taken over to Great Britain and melted there, and they made those lights from it. We still have them here.
So, Jan, the 1831 bridge stood for 130 years. What happened that it eventually was taken down?
Well, they didn't realize it, but this bridge was made of massive granite, and granite is heavy. But the underground in London is not that great. It's a little marshy almost. It's close to the North Sea. It's on the River Thames. So the bridge was sinking down. Not so much, a few inches every 5 years, but an inch sinking for a bridge is a lot.
Right.
So they knew they had to do something, and they put up the bridge for sale. One of the council members said, "Why do we just take it down? Why don't we sell it?" And there were a lot of people who would love to have it. There were a lot of buyers.
And, of course, we know who eventually purchased it, but who else was even interested in buying it? Like, would they use it in their city to go over water? Who were some of the other bidders?
Well, some of the casinos wanted it, because a casino always needs an attraction. Some of our famous comedians, Red Skelton, wanted to build a theater from it. It all didn't. I heard from people from India, from really all over the world. So there was a bidding.
Oh.
And it was an auction, and McCulloch won the auction for $2.4 million.
So these people were looking to buy the London Bridge as an attraction, not necessarily to go over a body of water.
That's true. And that's why I think the Londoners liked it very much, what McCulloch did. He built it again. Well, he didn't have water yet then, but he built it over water.
So tell my listeners a little bit about Robert McCulloch. Who was he, and what is his background?
Robert McCulloch was born in Illinois. He was really from Wisconsin, but his parents lived there. He was from quite a rich family because the family was in oil. His grandpa had done a lot for Edison, built all kinds of transformers. And he went to university. And during his university, he started already all kinds of businesses because he was quite rich. He had got money from his grandpa. And he was a millionaire then. So he did a lot of, maybe some of your listeners know Paxton Motors. Well, that was from Robert McCulloch because his middle name is Paxton. He made carts, the best carts in the world, he said. He made boat engines. You hear it, it's always little engines, right? And he made, and that was his main thing, chainsaws. He built a factory in L.A., and after a certain time, he had to leave L.A. because LAX airport was expanding. The ground where he was got very expensive. So he found Lake Havasu, although he knew already from Lake Havasu because he had his test thing here for his boat engines on the lake. And then he thought, okay, I want to go. And I don't know how he ever came up with it. He said, I want to build a city of about 70,000 people. I want my factory there. It has to be on the lake. Who can do things like that? Of course, he had money, but he bought 26 square miles of land, divided it in parcels, made a road, all dirt roads, and he asked people to come over. But in those days, there was only Route 66. And that is not a road. It was too easy to get over here. Vegas did hardly exist. You couldn't go to Phoenix. Phoenix was not big then. But there was no road from the 10 to Lake Havasu City. So he was kind of in trouble. He had land, then he bought 10 constellations and electras, and he invited people to come over to Lake Havasu City. Free flight, free stay, free food. But as you know, when they were here, of course, he wanted to sell his land. And that happened. People were driving around and looked at all kinds of parcels. Well, a lot of them bought land. But a lot of them didn't because you had just a free vacation. That's the way it all started.
And what did people think of him? I mean, I heard he had as many as 35,000 people come to the area to look, to invest.
Well, the people here in Havasu, well, when they built the bridge, thought he was kind of weird. Other people saw him as a visionary because I think he had a vision. Well, sometimes I have a vision, but I don't have the money to get it going. He had a vision and he had the money too. I think he was admired. Yes, he was admired here. And still, he's one of our founding fathers. Come on. He did a great job.
So Jan, in his day, and of course we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the London Bridge in Lake Havasu,
yeah.
But in his day, what was it like to dismantle the bridge and ship it 5,000 miles to Arizona?
Well, first of all, it cost a lot of money because he had to take the whole bridge apart. He brought a stone somewhere in England on the River Thames, and then he cut parts of it. He didn't bring the whole bridge over. He only brought the outside over. Each stone had a number. When the bridge was still sitting together, each stone was numbered. Then they brought these outside parts in boats over from England through the Panama Canal, Long Beach, and then by truck to Lake Havasu. In the meantime, he had built a concrete structure, hollow, in the shape of the bridge. And when these pieces arrived, they attached them to the bridge. So when you look at the bridge, it is exactly what you saw in London, but the inside is different.
And he built this bridge over land or over water at the time?
That was the problem. There was no place where he could put it. So in Lake Havasu is a peninsula, and he thought, I will make a channel to make it into an island. And he built the bridge and used the dirt as molds for the 5 arches. When it all was done and everything was against it and all the granite blocks were in the right spot, he dug the channel.
Oh.
Simple.
So we see the outside of the bridge. He had the stones, the blocks shipped here from England. How many blocks or stones would you say compose up the outside of the bridge? If it's 5 arches, that's got to be a lot.
These are about 10,000 blocks.
Wow.
And a lot of these stones are everywhere. I have to tell you, last summer I was in the Netherlands and I went to a town in Amersfoort, and there's a big block of the London Bridge, and it says on it, big piece of London Bridge given to us by so-and-so. And that's not only there. Everywhere are pieces of the London Bridge because the inside. In Lake Havasu is still a lot left, so if we have a problem, we can always repair it.
And are those numbers still visible on the blocks, or are they faded after 50 years?
Well, most of them have faded. In some places where the sun is not too harsh, you can see some numbers. Yeah, it's still visible. And the bridge, by the way, was very dirty when it came over here because all the soot and smoke from London
absolutely, yeah,
was on it. But if you look at the bridge now, it's clean. When I have British visitors, I always tell them, "Oh, your bridge was so dirty. We had to all come out with toothbrush and clean it." But that's not true.
And how do they respond to that, Jan?
Oh, they look at me. And well, We don't have to clean it because we have the sun here, and the sun in the desert, as you know, is treacherous. Well, you can see it on our cars. We don't have rusty cars. We have cars with no paint on it because it's burned off.
I have a listener who actually lives in London, Charlie Beaton, who's a big supporter of this podcast, so I know she's going to get a big kick out of that.
I have to tell you one thing for your British listener, because in London, they tell the story that McCulloch bought the wrong bridge, that the British betrayed him a little bit. He wanted to buy the Tower Bridge. They sold him, and oh my God, it was the London Bridge. I went on a boat tour on the River Thames, and that's where they tell that. It's the bridge from the other bridges in.
And that's not true?
No. And that millionaire, well, what happened when McCulloch had a press conference, of course he had seen the bridge. He has been there before he bought it. He said, well, when the bridge arrived here, it was so exciting. I unwrapped it, and oh my God, there were no towers in it. He joked about it.
So he had a sense of humor, huh?
That's for sure.
So if that bridge could talk, what would it tell us about the history, whether it be World War II or tell us a story about Sergeant Fitzwater?
Let me tell you, every bridge that have been different London bridges will have a lot of stories and a lot about people and a lot about people who walked across it or drove across it. I guess Eisenhower crossed it, and Queen Elizabeth and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. But one day in World War II, there were two American soldiers who were in London. It was 1942, just after the United States ended the war. They had a day off, went to London Bridge and scribbled a name in there, Fitzwater and Smith, 1942. And that stone came with the bridge over to the United States. It's amazing, isn't it? And it's still there. At first I thought it could be a joke. Fitzwater and Smith were here, and, well, after they had a beer, they went over there and said, we were there in 19... But that's not true. It happened in 1942. I heard it from Fitzwater. He wrote a whole story about it. And he was a little embarrassed that he had done that, scribbled his name in that. But we are very happy he did that because it shows you something from those days. World War II, soldiers from the U.S., all in England. And I know a lot about Fitzwater. He wrote a book about his life and everything. He has been wounded, went back into the war. Yeah, quite a memorial with these names there.
Is that etching by Fitzwater, is that still visible today in Lake Havasu?
Yeah. Still visible.
Where would my visitors go to see it? What part of the bridge is it located at?
Well, they have to go to the island side, and when they come from the land side, and it's on the left-hand side, there are steps going down, and you go about 10 steps down, and if you look back to the abutment of the bridge, then you see that.
And I'll have a link on the show notes page. I actually have footage of Jan giving a tour of the bridge.
Okay.
True or false, you can actually see bullet holes in the bridge?
Yes. In the beginning of World War II, Hitler wanted to invade England and Great Britain. So there was the Battle of England, the Battle of Britain, they call it. So they bombed London, and they came over with airplanes to shoot. And, okay, one day there was a Messerschmitt and a Spitfire fighting over London. The Messerschmitt crashed on the London Bridge, and the Spitfire was behind him shooting at him. So the Spitfire shot holes in the London Bridge, and you can still see him there. It's quite remarkable, because this is the only place in the continental United States where you see real damage of World War II.
Right, exactly.
Of course, Hawaii and Alaska is a little different. And I said, damage is, of course, damage in hearts of people.
And where is that visible on the bridge today?
That's again when you go across the bridge. It's on the left side, but you can see it best when you're down under the bridge, and then you can see it.
So McCulloch buys the bridge. He has it reassembled in Lake Havasu exactly 50 years ago. What was the opening day like?
I think there were about 30,000 people.
Wow.
It came from everywhere. It was a big parade. There was a tent in the middle of the bridge where an opening. The Lord Mayor of London was here. He had all kinds of people he knew because he lived then in California. And there were a lot of people, movie stars over here. They made a movie with Tom Jones.
Any other reference in pop culture, movies, TV, with the London Bridge in the new location?
Well, there is a movie, Terror on the London Bridge. I've seen the movie. It's with David Hasselhoff in it.
Jan, McCulloch also had C.V. Wood help him. Tell us who C.V. Wood was.
C.V. Wood was a special guy. He's one of the designers of Disneyland. He designed some other big parks, like from Six Flags and all that. Well, at a certain time, after he designed Disneyland, and Disneyland was done, McCulloch asked him to help him with designing Lake Havasu City. So these two guys, and they were perfect together. At a 50-year party, I met a daughter of McCulloch and a daughter of C.V. Wood. Oh. And they both told me they were friends. They did all kinds of weird stuff. Because McCulloch didn't only this one, he built Fountain Hills near Phoenix. And he always had something special. In that one, he had the highest fountain in the world. It blows high in the air. So that was kind of not Disneyland, but a little bit playful. And that's why he built the English Village, a little English-looking like little place where people come in and see the bridge.
So tell us about the English Village.
The English Village is a few shops together, and if you enter the English Village, you go through a gate, and it's a real British gate. It's from Whitley Court in Worcestershire, and McCulloch bought that one too. It's a gate from 18-something, and it's very nice because when you walk in, you see a fountain, and you see the bridge, and you see some nice little shops around it. You see the visitor center where I work. And then you walk up to the bridge, and yeah, that makes it look very nice. It is well kept. It is nice. It's interesting. You can eat something. You can get a present. You can sit around a little bit, and it's just a cool little place to spend a few hours.
Jan, do you get a lot of visitors from Route 66?
Yeah, we get a lot of visitors who have done Route 66, and they come over here to look at Lake Havasu City because, well, we are kind of a place with water, and well, Route 66 is a little, especially here in Arizona, is a hot place. Well, our people that stay here go on Route 66, and especially the part between Needles and Kingman is beautiful. I think it's the best kept part of Route 66.
Jan, so this year, what was the 50th anniversary celebration like for the London Bridge in Lake Havasu?
We had all month all kinds of things going on. Little things, but the big thing was the parade. This one was bigger than ever. And an official dedication under the bridge with the mayor and
What is the population today of Lake Havasu?
It's 55,000, so we have a little bit to go because McCulloch wanted 70,000. Yeah, but it's fine. 55. It is, as a town, it's all what you want. I mean, we have everything. The closest town, that's Kingman, and Kingman is smaller than we are, is an hour drive. Vegas is 2.5 hours drive. So we have everything we need.
And I think a lot of my visitors will be surprised to learn that the London Bridge in Arizona is the second most popular tourist attraction, second to the Grand Canyon.
Yeah, it is. It speaks to people when they come there and they see in the middle of the desert, there's a body of water and there's a bridge over, and the bridge is from England. I get a lot of people and they say, "Is that true? Is that really?" Yeah, it's really true. Sometimes I get couples. They said, "We fought all the way over it." He said it wasn't true. I tell them this is the real bridge. Yeah, it is.
Did McCulloch live long enough to see Lake Havasu develop?
No, that's a pity. He died in 76. He was just, I think, 65 years old. And he has seen the beginning. He has seen the bridge already, but he has not seen the development of the bridge. And that really, really took off, let's say, about 25 years ago. And it's still going strong because we see the town growing. A lot of people don't like that because they want to like to live in a small town. But, well, this is progress, isn't it?
Yes. Jan, one word. How would you describe Robert McCulloch?
A people person. A people person. He was nice to his people in his factory here. He was an interesting man. He always wore the same shoes, same kind of shoes, saddle shoes, golfing shoes. And, well, you will hear it from his grandson if you speak to him. He was nice. And he did a lot for Lake Havasu. He gave the bridge to the city. Well, we take care of it because I think the bridge, the London Bridge, gave us our identity. Without the bridge, we would have been that little town. Maybe we wouldn't have even been there. Without McCulloch, we wouldn't have been here.
Jan, here's the sales pitch for Lake Havasu. I have a very large audience that travels the road, a lot of international travelers. I want you to tell my listeners, if they visit Lake Havasu, what are the top things they should do in your city?
What they should do, come to the visitor center, get your information. We have a do-it-yourself walking tour. They can walk across the bridge and learn everything about it. You can walk along the channel and see how the lake looks. You can do a boat tour. We have several boat tours. You can be on the lake. And there is a lot to do. We have almost each weekend and through the week too, we have a balloon festival in January. In summer, it can be pretty hot here. But you know what? We have a lake, so you can dip yourself into the lake, rent a boat. The best way to learn everything about Lake Havasu is go to our website, is golakehavasu.com. You could see our lighthouses. We have about 27 of them. They're all around the lake. They are imitations of lighthouses from all of the United States. You can go to the other side of the lake. There is an Indian reservation, and there's a ferry that takes you there, $2 round trip. So that's a good price.
Jan, thank you so much for joining us today on the Route 66 podcast.
You're welcome. Thank you.
This is Michael McCulloch. I'm the grandson of Robert P. McCulloch Sr., who purchased the London Bridge in 1968 from the city of London and moved it piece by piece to Lake Havasu City, Arizona.
Michael, thank you for joining me today on the show.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Michael, in one word, how would you describe your grandfather, Robert McCulloch?
I would say that my grandfather was an entrepreneur. He was very gifted intellectually. He was very smart, went to Princeton, and then he went to Stanford, and he majored in engineering, and started building engines when he was young. Started an engine company, built it up, and then sold it to Borg Warner for $1 million when he was about 30 years old. So he was well on his way back then. The area that he was the most gifted in was in engineering, motors, designing, inventions, that type of thing. But then he went into land development, and then obviously saw the opportunity for the London Bridge, which it was advertised as being for sale. But I think that most people probably looked at that and thought that would be a joke. But no, he thought it would be a good idea, went out there and bought it.
Michael, how old were you when your grandfather purchased the London Bridge?
When he bought it in 1968, I was 9 years old, because I was in third grade and had heard about it when I was in school. I actually got called out of class and sent to the headmaster's office. I wasn't quite sure why, but I guess they had either heard it or heard it on the radio, or anyway, it had been fairly large, in the news at the time. So I was told by my headmaster that my grandfather bought the London Bridge, which I was a little confused about that, but just basically said, "Are you talking about the one that's in the song?" And they said, "Yeah, the one in the song." And apparently he's going to, dismantle it and then reassemble it back in Lake Havasu, which then kind of made sense. But anyway, yeah, I was 9 then, and then I was about 12 when the bridge officially opened for, use.
So you were an upcoming schoolboy. What kind of jokes and how did all your friends rag on you that your grandfather bought the London Bridge?
They didn't really rag on me that much. I mean, it was for whatever reason, it seemed like children seemed to understand it better than adults. It was later on when I was an adult and I went back and I read some of the articles about it. They weren't. Most of them were not very favorable. They were sort of they described him as crazy or office rocker, kind of a pipe dream, all that kind of stuff. But once it was built, then the tone changed a little bit. And then now 50 years later, there's been quite a lot of press about it. And the tone has completely changed. Now it's, he was a visionary and it's a huge success and it's the jewel of the desert and all that type of thing. But it's Lake Havasu in general is a very beautiful location, but having that bridge there really it's the icing on the cake for that town.
Michael, behind every successful person is a spouse or parents. What was your grandmother like?
So my grandmother came from a family with a similar background as my grandfather. Her father was Briggs of Briggs and Stratton, which made small engines. So in Milwaukee, where both families lived, they were. My grandfather hadn't really. He was up and coming, but he was not quite as well known as the Briggs part was of Briggs and Stratton. But anyway, they were a large influential family from the Midwest, also in engines. And once they got married, then obviously I'm sure that my grandmother and her father had some influence on my grandfather and where he was headed and what the type of engines he wanted to produce and that type of thing. She definitely, she had a background in small engines. And so I'm sure that definitely helped steer him on his course.
Michael, Jan wanted me to ask you this question about your grandfather's quirky dress habits with his shoes.
Okay. Well, it was the shoes and his regular, the whole outfit was quirky. The shoes in particular were he always wore brown and white saddle shoes, but his usual outfit was a chino suit, and then he didn't wear a tie. Sometimes if he did wear a tie, then it was a very thin black tie. And then the chino suit was kind of like a light khaki color, I guess, or that's probably the best way of describing it. And then he always wore yellow socks with those saddle shoes, and then he had the pants tailored about 3 inches too short. So, and that was his outfit, and
wow.
He wore that almost all the time. There were times when he had to wear something a little bit different, but as far as every day that he went to work, that's what he wore, and really did not like having to wear much of anything else. If he had to go to like a special event in black tie or something like that, he tried not to have to do that. But I have seen some photos of him where he was wearing. Actually, there's some photos of at the opening of the bridge where he actually had on a red sport coat. But then the rest of the outfit was still the same. The chino pants, and they're too short, but always those saddle shoes. I don't recall ever seeing him in anything else. And he probably had about 40 pairs of those saddle shoes.
Wow.
There's a particular place that made them for him. They had his name on the inside of them, and that's what he liked.
Other than the London Bridge, what are some other fond memories you have about your grandfather?
Well, he was a lot of fun. He had a very good sense of humor. He was a very busy guy. He had a lot of stuff going on besides the land development. He had an oil company. He had the chainsaw company. And then he had a separate company where he just kind of, tinkered around with various inventions, things that the latest and greatest that he was trying to come up with. He came up with some things that were going to utilize magnets for cooking and that type of stuff. He was always a little bit ahead of his time, but, it just, whatever seemed to take off, and that's what he'd run with.
Michael, before we say goodbye, were there any favorite quotes or sayings that your grandfather would often say to you as a little boy?
I'm trying to think. Not really. I don't want to say he was irreverent, but he definitely, I for sure remember at Christmas, when my grandmother would try to keep kind of order at the table and that type of stuff, because not only was her children, but then grandchildren, all sorts of other stuff. And he was kind of a little bit of an instigator of getting us to be a little bit unruly and that type of thing. The funny thing about him was that he did this on purpose, but he called all of his grandchildren by the wrong name. So he always, whenever he saw me, he'd always say, well, look, there's Henry. And my sister, he called Sally. He just had these different names that he called us. And, we knew that he knew what our real names were, but for some reason he liked doing that. And that's one thing that always stands out to me. I would encourage anyone, if they ever get the opportunity, if they're somewhere along the Route 66, to definitely make a stop by Lake Havasu and check out the bridge.
Well, Michael, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
That's the London Bridge with both Jan Cassis, director of the Lake Havasu Visitors Center, and the grandson of Robert McCulloch, Michael McCulloch. I've been driving the road every year for the past 5 years, and I can't say I've been to Lake Havasu or the London Bridge, which is just a short trip off Route 66, maybe an hour or so, but very interesting to say the least. It'll be on my list of stops during my next trip down the road. And as a reminder, if you're a Patreon member, I have an additional 10 minutes of audio. And now here's the trivia question for today's show. On the last episode, Ramona Lehman revealed that there was something she's never done along Route 66, despite welcoming travelers for the past 50 years to the Munger Moss Motel. What has Ramona never done along Route 66? Travel the entire road from Chicago to Santa Monica. In fact, she revealed that she did travel the road with her late husband just a few years back, and while passing through the California desert, they made it as far as Roy's, and they stopped and looked at each other and decided to turn around and go back home to the Munger Moss Motel. Next time on the podcast, it's the Route 66 Scholarship winners. Now, I don't have a preview to play for you like I normally do, but I promise you, you will be both inspired and surprised with the diversity of entries that were submitted. Thank you for taking the journey with us here on the Route 66 podcast. Please visit Route66podcast.com for detailed show notes and to see video clips of the London Bridge, including vintage footage of the opening ceremony and a recent documentary that the BBC released. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend. I'd love to hear from you at Route66podcast.com, where you can leave me a voice message or send me an email. I'm your host, Anthony Arno. Be well.